It's only like 25 hours. That's insane. Way too overpriced. I mean, yeah, they make their jackets like everything's expensive. They have a lot of good, like, culture stuff. I got a lot of super down on her.
I love that show. Oh my gosh, so many episodes, but
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of violence. Yeah.
all right, good morning.
Is
everyone,
enjoying our beautiful weather?
I love the rain, so I'm enjoying it, but I know it's traffic awful and skating around awful. Thank goodness we weren't doing our research today. Yeah. All right. I had a thought. So, I was telling my class before this, so the advantage of having twins or the challenge of having twins is that when one of them does something, the other one wants to do it too. So Emma, my other twin, is here with us today, and she's very excited for gender. Her favorite topics. No, don't point you out. All right, very different individuals. I'd like to joke that she's my goth twin, and then Paisley, who came last time, is my like teal and pastel twin. Right, very different personalities, not identical at all, clearly. But so Emma's joining us today. Evan, childless figure. I do have one more kid who eventually would like to come, but she has horrible social anxiety and we'll probably put it off as long as humanly possible. But what we'll do today, we're gonna talk about chapter 4. So as I told you, we're going out of order. And I'd like to preface it by saying I know this is a really loaded topic. Okay, so this is definitely something that is very much in the news and very much like a political so we're not going to focus on that. Okay, I do have like all of that information, and we can talk about a little bit of that when we get to talking about gender and so on, and what that means now. But I just wanted to acknowledge that I do know that this is something that is very important. Okay, and so we'll avoid that as much as possible. We're going to focus mainly on the difference between sex and gender. What influences our gender? And I think actually knowing this right now of all times might be very helpful because sex and gender are very different things, right? Even though we're kind of moving toward maybe eliminating one of them on like a legislative level, they aren't the same. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about that along with what forms our gender and sex, some stereotypes, some varieties of gender. Yeah, so that's where we'll go today and then into next class. Okay. So what I want to start with, sex and gender. So I have a strong background in women's studies and gender studies and things related to this. And it's interesting because once you hit a certain level, we start to argue how they're sort of the same, but they are also very different things. One tends to influence the other. Okay, so your sex tends to influence your gender. For most people, the majority of people, their sex and their gender are relatively consistent, right? But not always, right? Sometimes they can be a little bit different. So let's look at the distinction between these two. And I think once you understand how they're different, you can kind of argue how they are a little bit similar too. But when we talk about someone's sex, so when someone has like a sex identity, we're talking about anatomy. Anatomy, chromosomes, things that are very biological in nature. So I could add biology here. sex is determined at the moment of conception. Okay, so when an egg and a sperm meet, in that instant, sex is determined. Now, I saw a TikTok this week where somebody was like, we're all born female. It was like Jurassic Park, right? Like it reminded me of Jurassic Park. And that's not true, right? At all. Like it was interesting. It was so popular, it had like 1 million likes to it, but it's not true, right? We are either born male or female, or technically we can have what's called intersex. So those are the traditional like things that would fall here: male, female, and intersex. And we'll talk more about that term later, but it's kind of a blending of the two where somebody maybe has atypical anatomy, where they maybe possess some attributes of both sexes. Pretty rare, but it can happen. So we're talking about anatomy, right? Whether you have internal or external anatomy of being male or female. Your chromosomal makeup, are you XX or XY or other? There are a few where we have kind of an atypical presentation of our chromosomes. So it's very biological, anatomical, right? And again, determined at the moment of fertilization when an egg and sperm meet. Now, gender, on the other hand, gender is something that is much more like cultural, social. It's more of like an identity. So we could say like psychological. Somebody's gender identity is something that they typically decide for themselves, right? It's your identity. It's something that's socially constructed. It's something that can vary from culture to culture. We get words here like masculine, feminine, androgynous, kind of an old word. Androgynous was a word that was made very popular in the 70s by a woman named Sandra Bem. It means like a blending of male, female. Ander and gyna, literally male, female. Now we tend to use more words like trans or maybe non-binary and a lot of others. Okay, but gender is something that you traditionally kind of psychologically perceive yourself in one way or the other. And it's an identity that you create for yourself. Right? So a little bit of a difference. So when we're talking about sex versus gender, they are very connected to each other, but they're different things. So one is biologically determined and one is more like your identity and socially constructed. Yes.
Like for gender stuff, like it's like a bunch.
Those would be pronouns, right?
But what about the non-binary people? Do they just?
It depends, right? So if you identify as non-binary, you might have different preferences for what you like, right? And it might be the ones that go with your sex or not, right? It's kind of your preference, right? And that's the key with gender is it's your preference. Yeah.
What about the people that just don't want to be a boy or a girl
Yeah.
or any of the genders names?
Mm-hmm.
What would you call them?
Yeah, it depends. It could be non-binary. It could be gender queer. It could be agendered. There's a million terms. And every time we think we have them all, we have more, right? Yeah. So the idea here, again, that gender identity is something that you construct. See, this is something we talk about a lot in our house. Can you tell? It's a very common topic in our house. And then you have a gender role that goes with your identity. Okay, so gender roles are your collections of like attitudes and behaviors that are typical for the gender you identify as, right? And so I have a couple of clips that I'd like to play for you kind of related to all of this. So some of you saw this last time when you were doing your research, that there's a lot of confusion about gender, right? Gender and orientation sometimes get confused. Now they seem like very common sense different things, but sometimes people get them mixed up. So I found an interesting clip. It was an interview, and I'd like to play it for you here, about a tool that's become popular called the genderbread person. And this was part of an interview kind of explaining It's so quiet, I'm like, what are you doing? All right, so I want to ask you to share, right, but was this, some of you, I watched some of you like write it so quickly, like it was clear and obvious, and I saw a lot of you, and so some of you as well, kind of looking around and thinking about it, like, how many of you, this was like easy, super simple, like you know exactly how you identify? Anyone struggle with what to write down? You're kind of going like this. So for some people, their gender identity is really obvious and clear, and for others, it might be very, very fluid. We live in a culture that wants everything to be in a neat, clean box, right? We want to put everything in a box, like you're male or you're female. Like, oh, we hate the other box, right? Or you're masculine or feminine, and then we hate the like non-binary, trans, like androgynous box. But in reality, your orientation, your sexual orientation, and your gender identity might be somewhat fluid. For some people, it changes, right? And we'll talk about this a lot when we get to orientation. Orientation tends to be more fluid than gender. But some people are very fluid in their gender identity. And again, you don't have to share, but any like thoughts or comments or reactions to thinking about it, right? You're so different from your sister. Like, I want to comment on everything. Yeah.
So, some people also, like I've seen a lot of people identify as everything, like everything except male or everything except female.
Okay. Yeah, and that could be your identity. The cool thing about identity is nobody can tell you what yours is. You get to choose your identity. There were a couple of hands. Did we have any thoughts? Yeah.
So funny you said that. You were right on the nose because it's for me, it's everything but masculine and male.
Okay. So that was what was clear for you, right? Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Again, you don't have to share, but just thoughts. Yeah.
So like physically, you know, female or woman, but at times I don't. It's like I don't feel feminine. I don't feel I take on more of a masculine. I'll even do more masculine activities
Sure.
or yeah, so it can change.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was it easy for you to identify
Yeah.
something? Yeah, and when it changes, it might be tricky to like give it a word, right? Like we want to always label it, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Yeah.
I think for me, it's a lot of how I like was raised and grew up. And I think it's just, I don't know if everybody else gets the experience of, my parents were very like lenient about how I dressed or how I, what activities that I participated in. So like when I went through puberty and like, the changes of becoming a woman, dress, et cetera, it was like very uncomfortable experience for me. But then I also had like the other side of it where I had like a couple people like comment because I didn't, when I was in middle school, like obviously you grow up with like hair and I didn't want to shave. And I also like had flatter shoulders and like musculature, and that also made me uncomfortable. So I like very much cover up because I was just uncomfortable either way. But now like I feel comfortable presenting very like feminine, but I also like when I'm with myself, I do like more masculine features of myself as well. So it's like it's a weird balance. But I would say like I identify as one. It's just I don't think I'm like uncomfortable with expressing masculinity sometimes. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and thank you for sharing. And thank you all of you who have shared. I mean, that's what I want you to hear as people are talking about this is we tend to think this is really simple. It's not always that simple, right? And like culture plays a role, society plays a role, and age, right? Sometimes like it's one way and it's clear and then it's not, right? We're gonna have that.
I remember I struggled a lot with my identity, just figuring myself out.
Yeah.
Especially during middle school.
Sure.
I went to a super like conservative Christian school, so there wasn't a lot of exploring that was really allowed.
Yeah.
Specifically in that institution. So it was really hard for me to explore, and I went from identifying as male, and then being like, oh, maybe this doesn't really fit. Maybe I need to identify as like female, and I was like, oh no, this isn't work either. And then like at some point I was just like, okay, maybe I'm somewhere in between, or maybe I'm somewhere out, or maybe I'm somewhere within or outside or both, you know? And I think that because I've become so like comfortable in my own identity and being so secure and like being like, you know what, I know who I am, I don't have a problem like outwardly being more feminine and not as worried of like, you know, being like misgendered or having my wrong pronouns used, because it's like not, I feel so secure within myself, and to me, it's like, I know who I am, I don't care if anyone else acknowledges or not.
That's amazing to hit that point, right? That's fantastic. Yeah.
It was interesting because especially throughout high school, when I would hang out, like I was really just friends with girls, but sometimes when I hang out with them, I would feel like othered from them. Like I felt like I wasn't
Sure.
feminine in the same way they were, and like I was behind somehow. But then, like in the last year, I realized I was a lesbian, and that helped me, like really come to terms with like I am feminine and I like presenting as, you know, I am a woman, and it helped me realize that, which was an interesting correlation because there's such a stereotype. Oh, well, you know, you're a lesbian, so now you have to be masculine. You know, like there's sometimes stereotypes there, which
Sometimes fails,
or,
sometimes
yeah,
not.
sometimes, exactly.
Mhm.
So it was just nice because it allowed me to understand like the fluidity of it all, and I didn't have to necessarily
Yeah,
feel like.
forces one or the other. Yeah. Okay.
You know, it was so uncomfortable growing up because I always felt like I was a little different than my peers, and like how she was saying that I wanted to do more masculine things,
Sure.
like wrestle or whatever, I don't know. But my parents, they would always like say, wear a dress, and when I would wear these dresses, I would literally cry, like I feel so much shame and like something like really heavy, you know, and in middle school. It was tough too, like how she was also saying, the womanly changes. And then I think in high school, like 8th grade, I had to cut my hair short and I just felt like liberty. I never felt like a guy or anything, like I identified as a male, but I always knew I was different from others, you know, and I also realized like, I'm a lesbian too, and like, I think you just said it right now, like sometimes the stereotypes fit and sometimes, you know.
Right, it can go either way, right? Where sometimes it's like, oh, well, that's where the stereotype comes from, right? It's like, oh, well, that fits to a T. And other times like, whoa, well, I wasn't expecting that. It's a different thing, right? And our culture, like, we tend to think it fits all the time, but I mean, just listening, and I'm really just touched by how like open and vulnerable you are. I mean, thank you. Like, it's amazing that you're sharing these things. Because it can be a very like personal, private thing that can be hard to talk about. Yeah.
I love home. Yeah. There's not very much. To explore the way to born the way you are and to stay that way.
Yeah.
Always very much more like transgender or the difference between and then and then like started to learn myself and stuff. Those finals, like I do identify as feeling like growing up. It was always like feels comfortable.
With a very negative connotation, it is always in a negative.
Yeah, I was really
And you're putting on the control piece of this, right? If you go to different places in the world, every place in the world has a different view of what's normal, typical, and what gender means. And that's where that cultural, social piece of it really comes into play, because it's different everywhere. Yeah.
I never understood the idea of gender expression and stuff like that, and they kind of always blamed it on like quarantine, and so,
It's easy to blame everything, you know.
and
I didn't really like, I had an idea of it, you know, but I was pretty much like, yeah, no, like, I'm a girl shooter straight, and then I transferred to a more like liberal arts school, and then I kind of just like fell into the deep end, and I was constantly changing, like, I thought I was gender fluid, I thought I was a guy, and I just went through all of this, all of it, and then I got to a point where I was like, I don't really have a idea or like a term I put on it, like, I can't be misgender, like, I really don't care what you call me, but I also know that like, I don't know, I like who I like, it's more what I like to call it, yeah, like, I don't really put terms on it, because I don't really know myself.
And I'm hearing so many good journeys of women, right? Like it is, it's a journey, it's a continuum, it's fluid, it doesn't have to be, you know, the way that we tend to view it, right? And that's something that I really want you to like keep in mind with this, like we have terms, there's a million of them, right? But like, you don't have to pick one if you don't want to. I grew up with parents who were super conservative, like they would make me wear dresses to school and I would cry. Like I showed you the picture of it earlier, right? Because we were talking about this with our kids, and I'm so grateful that I could break the cycle for them. When we went on our cruise, we went on a cruise in November, and there are formal nights on a cruise. You have to dress up. Now, I hated dressing up, because dressing up meant like, well, you're wearing this dress, right? And that wasn't how I wanted to dress up. So we took our kids to like a store, and we're like, you can pick whatever you want, as long as it's formal, right? And my daughter Paisley, from last time, she
wore a suit.
she put on a tux, right? We went over to the boy, like the boy section, right? Because we have boy and girl sections and everywhere. And she picked out a tux, and I was all like, I can help you with that. Let's go. Like, oh, so I have 3 daughters, right? Like, so it was like, let's go. And I'm so not feminine. So my partner, who's very feminine, like thankfully had them covered, right? Mom had you guys covered, right? But like for me, I was like, okay, I'll take Paisley to that section. Let's go. And she ended up not wanting that and got this beautiful, like, skin tight purple dress, which fit her like in every possible way perfectly. But they had that choice, right? And that wasn't something that I grew up with by any means. My mom now is still like has a really hard time, like we were talking about, has a really hard time, like in our house, I go by dad. Okay, and that's just because it fits me, right? If we go back a slide here and we talk about gender roles, like I fit the stereotype of dad to a T. Right, and just for simplicity, we're like, okay, well, we're 2 women, like, so let's go for it. Like, so I get Father's Day, she gets Mother's Day, right? I love like all the stereotypical guy stuff. Like, I can't wait for Super Bowl Sunday, and my partner's like, oh my God. Right? Yes, right? And so I love sports, and I love all like the traditional typical guy stuff. And so in our house, I'm dad, I'm husband, right? And those are just terms that we use in our household, right? My mom was like, she came to visit a few months ago, and she's like, I just can't, right? 21 years that I've been with my partner, right? And gone by dad. It's for 13 since we've had kids. And she's all like, well, I'll just call you Waldo, because that makes just as much sense. If it makes you happy, whatever. But like, there's so much of this, right? Yeah.
I think, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but Grace was touching on a really good point, I think, with schools, and that's what I was gonna say,
Yeah.
is I think the school you go to too, and
Oh,
how
that's
they
it.
treat different genders is very impactful
Yeah.
on how your experience with like discovering your own gender.
Yeah.
Because I know like at my middle school, I got dress coded in 6th
Sure.
grade for something that I didn't think was even close to being dress codable. But it's like, it's a weird experience to go
Yeah.
through like that shame and not have that same standard for guys, and it makes you kind of uncomfortable
Yeah.
expressing yourself with like clothing choices. And the like, I feel like shame surrounding getting in trouble for
Yeah.
clothing choices, how you're expressing yourself
Yeah.
definitely impacts kind of how you feel about yourself and your gender identity.
All those environments matter. And you might not remember this because you were in kindergarten, but in kindergarten, they gave her a homework assignment. And it was like a picture of somebody, and you had to circle boy or girl, right? And Emma, like my little progressive at 5, wrote other and circled it in the middle. And the teacher, she got in trouble for it. And like, we were like, oh, hell no. And the 2 of us, both teachers, marched in, and we were like, why did it have to be one or the other? And like totally we're willing to like put our gloves on. But you were 5, right? And I think, you know, it's probably growing up with parents like someone like me, right? But I mean, we do have this dichotomy in school, right? It starts very early.
really think because it's like, particularly with the activity of writing down what it is, it just, I don't know, like I wrote down gender queer, I was like,
Yeah.
it doesn't fit non-binary, it doesn't fit me either, so it's just like, you know, it's who I am. Sure. And it's like, it's a part of me, I don't know how to describe it, I feel like there's a lot of things in life that are like that.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, there are no wrongs with me, and obviously that doesn't go for everyone.
Yeah.
There's wrongs for some people, but I think for me, everything goes. And I think, you know, being able to see everything and going through learning the story and everything has left me with such a wide perspective. And such a wide amount of respect for so many other people and their journeys as well. It's like, you know, maybe I wasn't a trans man, but trans men have so many amazing experiences that they have, and it's so insightful to learn about that from their community. And just like, being in different communities, whether it be on your own community, just because you want to be an ally and learn more, or just because maybe you don't know that much about it and you want to learn more. And I think there's so much beauty in the human ability to learn and grow and change and, you know.
You have to write it down, right? And I can resonate with that. I'm very open, right? Like I identify as non-binary. If I had to pick a term, but I hate that term, right? Like I even want to reject that term, right? Like I'm like, don't define me, right? I don't want to be defined. But if I had to pick one, I guess that's where I'm at. Like if I have to, right? And you don't have to, right? The world might make you, but you don't have to. Yeah.
And then going off of both Molly and Bella, I'm also lesbian, and I just wanted to emphasize like how much your sexuality also influences your gender.
Oh,
because
for
of
sure.
things like gender roles.
Yeah.
Like I know when I first realized I was a lesbian, I was in fifth grade and I was like, I have to be really masculine now. Hated it. Oh my gosh. It was not who I was, but I felt like it's what I had to do.
Yeah.
Because that is like what I read on the internet and everything that I had read was like, this is you like this now, so you
Right.
have to do this. And I really disliked that. And also I am autistic, and with a lot of autistic women or autistic APAP people, there's always like, you feel like you're on the outside looking in when you're like regarded as a girl. You don't really feel like a girl because no one treats you like a girl when you have autism, because autism is such like a masculine kind of disability.
Yeah.
Everything, all the studies are done based off of boys. So when they're testing you for autism, they're not testing you for it, they're testing you to see how masculine you are. So it's also that added layer. And if I had to explain, I would also say non-binary, but I don't.
Yeah.
know.
But I love this. So like what you're getting at though, and like I imagine this is true for a lot of you, is all of your identities have an intersectionality to them, right? They all connect with each other. Your orientation, your sex, your gender, your ethnicity, right? Your mental like ability and status, everything affects it like everything else, right? And so they're all kind of interconnected. And sometimes there's a freedom in that. And sometimes there's a challenge in that. Because what's the instant assumption you see a very like effeminate man? Instant assumption. He's gay, right? Or very like masculine woman, gay, lesbian, right? Like, and so there's all these intersectionalities that are present, and they get at this idea of gender roles, right? There is an expected formula that you follow for each gender identity, right? So let me like play these two clips for you, and then we can chat a little more if you have more thoughts. But I'm gonna put you on hold. Okay, so when we look at gender roles, so I found a clip for both men, dynamic, right? And we don't tend to view it that way. And again, just to reiterate, very different from your sex. But sex very frequently determines gender, which is where the confusion sometimes comes in. So what we'll look at a little bit is like, what are some of the things that determine your sex, which then might shape your gender, right? Any other like comments or thoughts though, before we keep going? Yeah.
I fit pretty comfortably most of the time into the word like woman or female, but I don't like when people use it as a shortcut to get to know somebody. You haven't met somebody because they fit into an identity, and that identity has a list of terms that
Yeah.
they possibly have. And I feel like that's the only time I really chafe against it. And I get that same thing when it comes to race, when it comes to things like, oh, you like this thing, but you're black. I'm also white. But depending on the person,
Yeah.
you know, which that's how you get into like the whole term Oreo and how that's problematic.
But they're like, oh, you act like a white girl. I'm like, I am also a white girl.
Uh-huh.
That is the thing I also am.
I have multiple identities,
I have
right?
multiple identities,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't fit into, I feel like, for instance, I don't drink Starbucks anymore, but like liking Starbucks, I don't know why, but there are some white guys out there who are like, but you're black, and I'm like, how have I run into this conversational point more than once?
Uh-huh.
But no, yeah, and I feel the same way about gender, and I think that like, I think some people, it's easier to not have to think about getting to know somebody and just have a default,
Sure.
you know? But like, life is never easy, I'm sorry, life is hard, you have to know people and know your friends.
Yeah, and it's actually adaptive. It's a cognitive shortcut, right? Like, and so when we meet someone new, we default to those shortcuts, but you have to move past the shortcuts at some point too. And so when you only treat people like their stereotyped identities, there are problems. But sometimes we fit our stereotyped identities and sometimes we don't. So we use those shortcuts, but they should never be all that you use,
Kind
right?
of reminds me a little bit of when people are like, oh, I just prefer having the man do all the bills because it's easier. I'm like, you should at least know like a little bit
Sure.
about your financial situation, just a little. For like,
Tiny bit.
yeah, what if he gets into a car accident and he needs, you to handle that for a little bit? I'm just saying, there were
Mhm.
issues with that.
Right? There's issues with all of it. Yeah, did you have a thought?
When I was like in high school and middle school, I would, like, as a black woman, you didn't think I would be into all like the guy stuff, like rap music and all that stuff. Well, as a black female, I listen to rap music. I love Tupac, I love Dr. Dre, I love Biggie Smalls. I love all the rap stuff, and I would always get stereotyped for wearing like black clothing, like those. All my friends would be like, "Oh, you're so emo. You listen to emo stuff." I love pop punk stuff. I listen to Panic at the Disco. I listen to Fall Out Boy. Like Panic at the Disco is actually my favorite band. They've been my band. I'm a huge Panic at the Disco stan. I love them so much. I love them. But I would always get made fun of for
Sure.
being black as a black female because I have this great story, but when I was walking towards the school, this, I guess, principal called the cops on me and she stereotyped me because she thought I was a thug and she thought I was 17 and ditching high school. And I was like, no, first of all, I'm black. Second of all, I wear black clothing because I feel more comfortable wearing black clothing. Like when I was little, I hated wearing dresses. I hate wearing dresses. I will only wear dresses for special occasions, but I don't like wearing dresses. I just like wearing black clothing because
Yeah, there are preferences. We all have preferences, right?
yeah, but like as a black woman, I feel more comfortable wearing guy clothing because I feel more comfortable wearing black clothing because it feels more comfortable to me than wearing like colors.
Yeah.
Because I like black, I like red, I like blue. I just don't like wearing anything too girly. I just like wearing tomboy stuff because I will always be a tomboy. That's why will always get me fun of for being black and for being a black woman.
And again, it's all these intersectionalities. So let's do like one more thought and then we'll move on just so do you have a thought?
Yes.
Okay.
Me too.
All right. You've had your hand up for a very long
Yeah,
time.
me too.
Okay.
So I have this friend, me and her are not friends anymore, but yes.
Okay.
Okay,
I hate this person, but that's okay. Okay, go ahead.
Gender stuff.
Mhm.
Like at first, she was just a girl. She identified as a girl and stayed with that. And then she identified as both a boy and a girl.
Sure.
And then she bounced into like just being a boy and then bounced back to being a girl.
Mhm.
So she just kind of goes by all of them now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And that's okay, right? And that's okay too. Right? So just to like get back into this, and again, I appreciate so much all of your like thoughts and stories. I just think it gives such a richness. I can tell you my life, but I think hearing all of your lives, right? It's just really like fascinating. I think it just drives some of these things home. And again, there's nothing wrong with identifying with your sex or not with your sex. Like it's totally up to you. But your gender identity is very influenced by biology. Okay, there's no denying that sex and gender are connected. And so when we talk about sex, and I mentioned this earlier,
sex is determined at that moment of like fertilization or conception. When a new cell is formed, boom, sex is determined, okay, right off the bat by genetics. That is your chromosomal sex. Now, this is something that will be talked about a lot because that's how we're now going to define sex in our nation for a period of time, right? That your chromosomes dictate your sex, okay? So XX for women, XY for men, though there are people who don't fit that neatly, and that might be a problem, right? So we have this idea that you have chromosomal sex. So just to like show you what that looks like, very like kind of not complicated process in some ways, but let me show you what this looks like. It's a very brief little animation. Where did it go? There we go. I guess that's the process. A chain of events to happen, right? So your sex chromosomes then dictate what gonads you'll develop. Okay, men and women stereotypically have different gonads, right? So for men, we have the testes, which produce testosterone and other hormones, which we'll talk about. Women have ovaries, which produce estrogens and other hormones that we'll talk about. And your gonads then determine your anatomy and your hormonal sex. It's this long chain of events. So for a period of time, when someone is pregnant with a baby, you can't tell the sex of that baby yet. What's really interesting is even though your genetics and your chromosomal sex has been determined, the structures, the anatomical structures that you have are the exact same for a period of time, right? Like the head of the penis becomes the clitoris, right? They are synonymous, right? Different parts of anatomy are represented across both sexes. So not until like in the teens, like typically 16 to 18 weeks into a pregnancy, can you see somebody's physical sex on an ultrasound? Sometimes a little earlier, but sometimes much later, depending on how cooperative the baby is. But all of these things start that chain of events into place. So your chromosomes determine what gonads you have, which release hormones, which then creates anatomy. Okay, so all of that is biological, 100% biological. And so when we talk about sex, that's what we're referring to, right? What that chain of events has yielded or led to. Now, tons of hormones. Hormones are huge when it comes to gender, when it comes to sexual response. There are so many hormones that we'll cover at some point in this class. Here are some of them that are kind of related to what we're talking about. And these are covered really well in your book. I just have kind of like a little highlight because most of these we'll see again. So I'm just kind of introducing them and then we'll see them later in the semester. But the androgens are typically what we call the male hormones. Testosterone is the main male hormone. Now, women possess testosterone as well, right? And men possess estrogen as well, just in a different concentration. So someone who is male tends to have more androgens, more testosterone, sexually male, right, than someone who is female who tends to have more estrogens. So the androgens, like testosterone, play a big role in sexual desire and the development of sperm and production of sperm, which we'll talk more about in male anatomy. The estrogens play a big role in like ovulation and the menstrual cycle that women like go through, right? They control like the development of those sex characteristics. And again, women have more estrogens than men do, but men possess estrogen as well. Progesterone, we'll talk about this a lot when we get to the menstrual cycle, plays a big role in like the growing of that lining of the uterus to help with pregnancy and implantation. GnRH is another one in the pituitary gland. It's like a master hormone that tends to trigger others. FSH and LH, we'll talk a lot about those and when we get to female reproductive anatomy in like a week. Right, both of these play a role in the development of eggs, in like ovulation. Prolactin is another hormone that plays a role in milk production after childbirth. And oxytocin, probably one of the most interesting hormones. We call this the cuddle hormone, right? It's released when we have physical proximity with somebody else. It's also released during orgasm and also during hand holding, during breastfeeding. It tends to facilitate feelings of closeness and connection. Really interesting hormone. And again, we'll talk about all these again, but these hormones, right? If I go back one slide, once your gonads are set, they release all of these hormones, putting all the other pieces in place. So all of these things are talking about your sex development, whether you're a male or female or intersexed, and then those can develop and like also influence your gender identity. Any questions, thoughts, comments, anything for now? Again, we'll see all these again. So just kind of introducing them. Yeah. When you what? So it could be cuddling with non-humans as well, right? So it could be released when like with pets, right? It's like the cuddle hormone in some ways, right? It has a lot of really interesting properties to it, which is interesting. As I mentioned, I've mentioned this term intersexed a few times just to define it. So intersex is somebody who possesses attributes of both. Okay, so it might be that they have external male anatomy, but internal female anatomy. Really rare, but it happens. We used to call this being a hermaphrodite. That word is not used anymore. It's considered like derogatory. But hermaphrodite came from the goddess Hermaphrodite, who possessed both male and female anatomy, which is what's pictured on the right. So we changed it to intersex, to somebody who might possess like an atypical chromosomal makeup or atypical hormonal like contributions. And I'm not going to go into these because they're pretty rare, but make sure you look, I want you to look at them in the book. Okay, this will be one of those things that I'm not going to cover, but please read over it. I might ask you on the exam, what are the two main categories of atypical differentiation? And give me an example of each. So there's a bunch of them, but they're very uncommon, like 99.6% of people follow a very typical sex development. But there are conditions where people don't fit neatly. And interesting because legislatively, this could be a little bit of a gray area that could be complicated. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember from my cisgender maternal class, but I know we talked about this, and I know like intersex people that have like physical attributes is pretty rare, but isn't there pretty, it's relatively common to have different like
Yeah, that's much more common. Yeah. Yeah, combinations of genitalia is really, really rare. Like not impossible, but really rare. It's more like typically it's more hormone or chromosomal makeup that can be a little bit different. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, so on the exam, which you'll have a study guide for, and we'll talk about, I might ask you, what are the two main categories and give you an example. So that's why I want to make sure you do look it up in the book in chapter 4, as we're not going to go into it. Okay. All right. So, and we talked a lot about this kind of already, right? So we develop our sex, and then from that, we develop our gender. Okay? Very interconnected as we're going off of it. And our gender is very greatly influenced by culture, by norms, and by stereotypes. There are so many stereotypes, and that's kind of what we were getting at with the gender role injunctions and the gender role stuff earlier. But I have some up here in these pictures, right? What I want you to do, and you're not turning this in, but I think it's a good thing to write down. Find like 2, 3, 4 people, whatever's easy around you. And I want you to get a list going. Write it down so you can share. What are some stereotypes? And we've kind of touched on this a little bit. What are some of the stereotypes of being masculine, male or masculine? What are some of the stereotypes of being female or feminine? So write them down, get in a group. Again, you're not turning it in, but write it down so you can share. I'll give you a few minutes. What are some stereotypes? I give you a kind of a starting point up here if you needed some. But write some stereotypes down. Okay, so find a few people, whatever's easy, and go ahead and write it. You don't have to answer. Oh, look, one of my students gave a moon pie. I don't know what's in it, but if you want to try it, you can try it. I kind of do. Want to go with me? Okay. Let's go.
Some gender, like, I've never heard of some stuff that's like, I've also heard of that. So you'll have some things where it's like, yeah, like, I would like to know how to fix it. But then also, like, growing up, like, being stressed. Yeah. I think it's good. It's like, when she was younger.
That's so long. I would say because, my daughter, is on CDs. What's that have to do like that's not. I mean, like that. On regular goes and has like. No, it's like having nails done right here. That's right. Pulling that stereotype, right? But that's one way or another.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's take just a couple more minutes and then we'll talk about it together, just another minute or two. I like the bright one. I like it. And then we'll get to downstairs better stuff. Yeah, we just got a few minutes.
Oh, they changed that. Oh, you already did that ever. Like,
All right, let's back to our big group in the interest of time. So, all right, so I feel like we kind of got at a little bit of this with like the different videos, but let's just get a list. Anyone want to share? Let's start with mass stereotypes. Give me one. Yeah.
We had a funny one that was putting up Christmas lights.
Okay.
So like that's supposed to be the man thing to do.
That's my job in our house. Right? Okay, so we have the Christmas. My neighbors, every year they put up their lights, I just listen to them fight, I'm like, they're gonna get more. So every year, this year was like, I said 6 inches. And he was like, "This doesn't matter." It's all like, yeah, do I need
It's
to
not
tell you
just
what 6
males.
inches matters about? I was like,
It's
So-
just male.
Oh, let's share our headphones up for that. Okay, so other masculine things, you have another one, yeah,
Being the breadwinner for the family.
yeah, you know.
Oh my God.
Outdoorsy.
Okay, you like to be outdoors, yeah,
Like emotions, like when
okay,
it's like very like stereotypes that men can't show emotions or they don't
Yeah.
show emotions and then women.
right, and then on the flip side, right?
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Okay, all right, perfect, yeah, all right.
We also said like sexually dominant or like praised for having sexual activity.
Okay.
Like versus women where they're more like shamed for it or like supposed to not be as sexual.
Yeah, yeah, right, we view the same behaviors differently depending on who they're ascribed to, yeah. Okay. Right, hard alcohol,
Yeah.
beer, right, like
Yeah.
the traditional guy drinks.
I think that those influence also men are like simple and they don't have to have like a lot of skincare products or like hair care products or a lot of decoration, because like it's like simple.
At least on the surface, right?
Yeah.
Okay, other things, yeah,
Nurturing and demure.
for men?
For women.
Oh, for women, we're still on men.
Sorry.
I was all like, whoa, I haven't heard that one, right? Anything else for men, yes?
Like lone, like men can be like the lone wolf. Like,
Oh, yeah, okay, and that's like desirable in there too, right, yeah,
I can put in like the emotional word, or like being emotional mature.
okay, for men still?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Or like physicality, like any like muscles or like anyone that does sports, generally like call more masculine than like
yeah.
they wouldn't.
Yeah, like you gotta be strong and physical in the sports, right? You gotta be into sports, right? Whenever I meet someone who's male for the first time, I'm like, so the Super Bowl. Like I go right there, right? Like, and half the time they're like, and I'm like, oh, we're not friends, right? Like, that has nothing to do with like anything, but like sometimes those stereotypes can be starting, points, right? Yeah.
I think one is kind of like people assume men are like extremely sexually active all the time, like
Yeah.
they're on their mind like 24/7.
Sex, beer, food, TV, football, right? Sums it up, right? Yeah.
You have to be a leader, take charge, never ask questions,
Yeah.
like the map. You
Yeah.
know exactly where you're going.
Don't ask for
And
directions.
if your
right?
wife was like, oh, maybe we should use map, like, no, I got this, as you get increasingly more lost.
I love it, right? Definitely a stereotype. Anything else we want to add? Yep.
Like, I guess like, oh, being the golden child,
Okay,
like men have it so easy with being the golden child.
okay.
Dude, I'm a woman. I am not the golden child.
Sure, right? Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
Like toys, like Barbies are for girls and. cars are for boys.
Toys are very gendered. And so interestingly, just as a like a little thought.
Well,
remember
girls can
the
like
work
bars.
assignments in here. One of them is looking specifically at gender. So you can go to any store that sells toys, which could be, Target or Walmart or anywhere really, like, you don't have to buy anything, so if you don't want to support, like, whatever, you don't have to. But looking at the toys, they're so gendered, right? We have girl aisles and boy aisles. And sometimes a few like Lego aisles in the middle, right? But those are typically gendered too. We'll go back there and I'm going to yeah, okay,
Typically being more violent.
okay. Aggressive and violent, yeah. You want to add?
No, I just wanted to, I think what I've seen like differently now, it's like, back then to I guess now, like video games,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
like, like FPS is now it's like for like women play, but back then it's like it was only like a men's strict game, you know?
Right,
Yeah, it was like
right,
very rare to like get online and select what you play.
yeah, right, definitely a big stereotype, yeah.
Ability to like build and fix things.
Yeah, you gotta be able to fix stuff, right, and build things. What about women? Stereotypes of femininity, let's go that side, yeah.
So, I mean, this is personal because I'm a butcher, and so I feel like a lot of people just expect me to be like, oh, I don't know anything about me, like I was just.
Sure.
And like, just be like stupid, you know, like boys relying on a guy or something like that.
Right, it's unexplained.
Yeah.
You don't know anything. Okay, great, I think you had a good too.
Generally like household stuff, like household. work,
Yeah.
it's like, you know, like a woman role in the household.
Right, right, you have to handle all of that, that's your role, right, yeah.
More artistically inclined.
Okay, okay, artistically inclined, yeah, just go down the road here, right, yeah.
Asexual.
Okay, you're not interested in sex, yeah,
Mental disorders get gendered a lot, like
they do,
women,
depression,
like
anxiety.
women, like will be more likely to be diagnosed like an eating disorder or anxiety versus like if like a man could never like fathom being diagnosed with an eating disorder versus like ADHD and autism is much more of like a masculine disorder. Some people just won't be diagnosed and get help because of societal expectations.
Yeah, definitely mental illnesses have a very strong gender stereotype in them, yeah.
Being a natural caretaker.
Okay.
Able to like care for other people.
Yeah.
Just inherent.
Yeah, right, it's expected, yeah.
I feel this especially, like, obviously this is like for all men, but it's definitely a lot more for Asian women particularly is being submissive.
Okay, yeah, right, and then you get that interplay of culture adding to the, like, the element of gender.
I've had people say that I'm super Americanized,
Sure.
whatever that means.
Right, okay, all right, yeah,
I think even like food, because like if you go on a date with a guy, it's like, she'll get the salad and he'll get the burger and the fries, like, I just feel like, I don't know, that's.
oh, for sure. Food can be gendered. I ordered a salad once in the early days of my relationship with my partner, and she gave me this look like, salad? And I was like, yeah, but it's got a lot of stuff in it. I ordered some croutons, right? I think I had to justify it. I was like, well, I asked for extra croutons and wonton strips and, you know, this dressing can be in it, right? Yeah,
Taking care of your appearance. It's
Yeah.
such a funny thing. Look like you're gay if you just take care as a man.
okay.
Which is like, I am gay, but that doesn't like.
Like a small box, you put someone in, I live in the box, but that's.
Right. I'm in the box, but that doesn't, you know, we're not. Right, and sometimes, again, the stereotypes fit, that's where they come from, right? But it doesn't mean you should be pigeonholed into it, right? Yeah,
Questions.
Yes.
So they can be, so like a woman, like an assistant
Yeah.
or those types of things. So
a nurse versus a doctor.
Yep,
Right?
exactly,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
Not, definitely not gonna be a mechanic, God forbid, you know,
Well, because if you are, then what?
but then you're.
You must be gay, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, put
right.
on those overalls, yeah.
which sometimes fits too, right? But yeah,
The whole like nurturing the weird thing is like
Yeah.
meant to be a default instead of like, for instance, with nurturing, I think it's something you can learn. Like, I'm sure there are a lot of people who've had babies and don't feel an immediate nurturing to
Sure.
it. And then as time goes on, they build up those skills as they get to know their kid.
yeah. But that expectation that that's where you
You
start.
have to, like, the moment you adopt or give birth, then you
Yeah.
have to have it.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely. Right, like, it can't be a logical, rational reason, you must be like mental.
Yeah.
Okay, definitely, yeah.
I work at a taekwondo studio, which is, taekwondo is a very like male dominated sport.
Sure.
And so at least in the sport itself, it's very traditional that like men do all the sparring and then women do forms, which is like the more art form of the martial art. And like, we always call everyone like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. There's no like, in between. Yeah.
Okay, interesting, yeah.
Just the like, the idea that like a woman can be like cooperative in a relationship, like I've gotten hit on or harassed, and then my boyfriend comes up behind me and the guy's like, oh, sorry, dude, like, I didn't know like she was yours.
To the ones you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I've never gotten the apology, it's always my boyfriend who gets the apology, you know, I get harassed.
Interesting, okay, yeah, I can see that, yeah.
I have two, one like immediately assuming that you're less intelligent because you're a woman, and then like the second one would be like, have like a ability to like explore their sexuality that they don't have.
Yeah.
Like, 'cause it's just, there's less, it's, I think also because it's sexualized, that it's not, you're not necessarily like put in a box.
Yeah.
I heard like a lot more bisexual or bisexual. Because like for men, it's like super signifies to be bisexual.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For men to explore like their sexuality, that would tends to be very differently than women do, right? Yeah.
This is just something that I don't bring up, that's just, that's one thing, but a lot of Asian men seem very feminine because of cultural differences, so I think that, I just want to put that in there.
Yeah.
It's like, Asian men are, like, especially in a lot of media, aren't typically seen in very masculine, typically masculine leading roles. They're
Sure.
always like the butt of the joke, or like called gay for certain like different practices, which is like weird because it's like why. And it's like for like you have like a lot of stuff that like these Asian cultures specifically for like taking care of the parents because the parents are very over there, and a lot of those practices typically considered.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, yeah.
Giving back on the point where we are more allowed to express.
Any, like, at least from what I've seen, a lot of bi men are considered gay, a
Right.
lot of bi women are considered straight. So there's just that stereotype.
Yeah, there's also sometimes a stereotype that it's like trendy and like it's not real, you know, between women versus between men. It might be more viewed or more severely anyway, right? Yeah.
Technology.
Yeah.
And how, I feel like that ties to what Lottie said.
Sure.
Especially with like intelligence of like, oh, well, new technology is masculine, and I feel like you could even tie that into like a lot of fashion that is for women, are like hand-me-downs basically, for what was men's fashion in the past. And also I feel like that just ties into how gender is just whatever's marketable at the moment to
Sure.
sell.
Yeah.
Because technology used to be more neutral, and then they had to pick, okay, well, what's our demographic?
Yeah. Yeah. There's always got to be that demographic, right? Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
visit, soft skin,
Mhm.
hair.
Soft everything, right?
You're supposed to be soft.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, so these are easy to come up with, right? Because they're obvious, right? And so what we'll do next time is we'll look a little bit at like how do we learn gender roles and then some varieties of gender expression. And then as a heads up, we will probably move on to, we'll finish that. We'll move on to chapter 5, we'll probably get to start that. Trying to make up a little bit of that lost time from that first week. So hopefully we'll get into the beginning of chapter 5 as well, just if you're wondering like how to prepare. But again, one last time, thank you so much for all of this wonderfully like heartfelt things that you shared. I really love getting to hear all of that. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Drive safe out there with the rain, and I'll see you all on Monday.